It's like, hey, I'm going to be in your movie. Cool. See you later. See you in Toronto.
I'm sure that was like, no, sir, we don't really want you. They're like, oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds good to us.
I would be like, Ving Rhames wants to be in this. Like, we're set. All right, cool. Hey, I'll see you in Toronto in 2 months. Peace. I think people came out for that. And also I think the vibe of Sarah Polley in this movie is so not the vibe of typical horror characters, right? She's super laid back, kind of like, sarcastic. She kind of fits in with everybody too. She gets 3 kills in the movie. She takes care of business. But it's like, I love her vibe in this movie because it's just this indie vibe, if that makes sense. It's not, it's not like she was excellent actor, but you're not getting like, who's like the hottest person right now. Let's put him in this movie. Or like, let's put this person in because they're, and I'm not saying anything about Paul. I just love her vibe in this. I think that's another reason why it doesn't get old, because she's just such a different presence on screen.
Yeah, I actually, she has one of my favorite interactions in the movie when she's playing Anna and she tells Steve, who's played by Ty Burrell, and he's like, listen, if I turn into one of those things, you have my permission to shoot me. And she's like, oh, don't worry, I'll do that. Absolutely. Yeah. I will shoot you. I will kill you.
And she does.
Yeah. And she does, right? So I love that, like, foreshadowing, but that whole nonchalantly, like, hey, man, listen, if something goes bad, you can shoot me. And she does not like him. So she's like, oh, you can count on that. I will kill you for sure.
I got you. Well, I like her interactions with Michael. I mean, it's I guess just the vibe. And she was the first choice that they wanted for this. So it's just, you could kind of tell what kind of movie they wanted to make with the people they cast.
You know, I think that every once in a while, you have a specific character in a movie or a series or a television show, and whoever is in charge of enlisting actors to play those parts, they just have somebody in mind. Like, they wrote that character based on that person. It's like, oh God, I don't know the actor's name. The guy that played Tyrion Lannister on Game of Thrones. He was the only one considered for that role. So whoever's in charge of, like, recruiting or hiring or canvassing for actors to be in your show, like, sometimes you just look at this person and you go, that's the character. That actor has to be in this role. And I just felt like that character that she played in that movie, she just nailed it. She was perfect.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I dig it. And it's just, I was looking through the different casting, the movies, the horror movies of 2004. And you had The Grudge. It was a success, right? Good remake. But then you had Van Helsing, Curse, which was a dud. Saw was successful, but wasn't great. Anacondas 2, which was bad. Shaun of the Dead, good movie. AVP, a lot of people didn't love. I loved it. Resident Evil Apocalypse, Blade Trinity, Tremors 4. So it wasn't that strong of a year of horror. So I'd imagine Dawn of the Dead sort of stuck out amongst the crowd. I think now I have a question. You watch a lot of bad horror movies, and then you watch a movie that's pretty good, and you give it a great rating. Like, do you think that could have happened with Dawn of the Dead, or do you think people love it this long because it's that good?
I gotta say that even after all this time, people still love that movie. So I think it just has to be a good movie. I mean, we can always talk about, hey, this came out and it was rated really well when it came out, but it hasn't really stood up well over the test of time. This is one that did. I mean, if you watch it now, if you've never seen it, or even if you have or haven't seen the original, but you watch this movie, I think you still enjoy it. I think it's still a movie that even today stands the test of time, and people go, you know, like we keep repeating, wow, that was a really good movie.
And I don't think are there any moments in this movie that you just take you out of the film? So I adore World War Z, but there's a scene where Jerry's driving along, and at the worst imaginable time, he gets a call. And you're like, I guess I don't think I really felt that with this movie. And I just want to read a comment here from Johnny Numb, who's a frequent guest on the podcast. He wrote, I remembered seeing the trailer before Texas Chainsaw Massacre 03 and being appalled on principle. How dare they? When I finally saw it, I was floored. Gunn's screenplay maintained 2 familiar elements from the original while tweaking certain things. Fast zombies, twitchers, the tricked out shuttle buses, which I love, and the chainsaw bit. Oh, it's so good. I threw that in, not Johnny Numb. And giving us a mix of likable characters and assholes. I think Snyder's overly stylized approach to the proceedings work well as a contrast to Romero's more workmanlike manner, right? Because as much as I love Romero, you look at his shots, you're not thinking that's beautifully framed. It's more about character, right? It's more about tone. And then, that said, I remember being first in line at a horror con years ago, where someone behind me asked, how did they know which boat belonged to Ty Burrell's Steve? And that question bothers me to this day. How did they know which was his boat? Because there's no beep beep.
Yeah, so, as we know that sometimes movies do that, where there's something inserted in it, whether it was just for flair, and sometimes it can be a director's choice. And I'll give you the perfect example. The scene where Steve leaves them high and dry, and they're running up the stairs, and they're trying to get the door open, and they're pounding on the door, and the zombies come around the corner, they're sprinting, and then they just stop. And then they look at them, and there's a moment where it's like they're no longer running up the stairs. They've stopped their movement, and they're just – because that scene was just so freaking creepy,
Mm-hmm.
So who knows why that happened, but I agree. Like, I never actually thought about it until I read that comment on your Facebook post, and I was like, he's got a point. Like, how did they know? You could say maybe when the whole idea came up and they were in the mall, he gave them the name of their boat and it was written on the side and they knew it was going to be at that dock, and they were just running down the dock and they're like, oh, there it is. But, it's just one of those small parts of the movie that who knows? It did. Thankfully, it wasn't enough to ruin the movie where you were like, "Oh, that's so stupid." How would they know that? And it was part of it that you have to go, that's a good question because I don't know how they know.
Yeah, I think you brought up the 2 points that I kind of not have issues with, but yeah, the boat now because of Johnny Numb. Thanks, Johnny Numb. But yeah, maybe they saw the name of the boat. But then they do wait on the staircase. It does provide a great visual. There's a good shotgun blast. I think what could be good about that moment is it gives you a little bit of time to breathe and be scared because it changes up the dynamic slightly for a couple seconds, right? So maybe it puts viewers in a different headspace than just a chase scene, right? So
yeah,
I mean, I do like the visual though of him shooting the thing and then it kind of slumps and the zombies have trouble getting around it. That's a neat visual. So the zombies wouldn't do that though. They would just run, correct?
And they would just keep running up the stairs. And, you think of World War Z and how they did the CGI when these things looked like waves of water running and turning corners. Like they weren't going to stop and assess what was happening. They would have just kept sprinting. But I think I read somewhere that it was a sort of something that the director wanted to add as a suspense thing where they were he wanted to, and I don't know exactly what his intention was in that point in time, but it was something that was intentionally done to create that sort of anxiety, at the moment because it was what's going to happen? And it gives you that moment to do that before it's then boom. And, they can't get the door closed and then they're running down and they're getting in the elevator and the elevator door's closing and the zombie's getting closer and thank God it closes.
Yeah.
It leads to the chase.
I think you're right. I think it's a good break and it gives it a chance to establish the door, to kind of create a little bit of time. It's a good visual of them just waiting there because you do need that. I guess in every single chase film you can think of, you do need a little bit of a breather to just embrace that. No, I think that makes sense. I see it, and I get why they did it. It just... The problem is, with horror movies, I think the thing that kills it is when you're taken out of it. Does that make sense? When you're...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. It's you want to escape reality and put yourself in that situation. I think that's why people like horror because, it gets your heart racing. You have anxiety for the characters, or they startle you, or whatever your thing is. And I think I know we said this in the zombie tournament. One of the reasons why I like zombie movies so much is when I was a kid, I was so terrified of them. It was just something that I watched it when I was too young, and it just haunted me for the longest time. And I really feel like I wasn't able to, as a kid, understand that that's not real. And I think that in watching the horror movies, you put yourself in the movie. And then when there's that moment where it's like, come on, it kind of takes you out of the movie. You know what I mean? Like, you want to always be with those characters, feeling their fear, feeling their anxiety. And as soon as you have that moment where you're like, what? That's ridiculous. That wouldn't happen. And, all that, it kind of takes you. That's why, like, I cannot watch cop movies. I can't watch it.
Yeah.
Because I just I'm like, every time I watch them and there's this like 32 car pileup, all I can think about is, damn, that's a horrible accident report. I don't want to handle that. I have to be the guy that responds and has to do that accident report and, take all those statements and get all that vehicle information and put it into the computer. Like, that's how I see them. So that takes me out of the reality of being able to enjoy those cop movies. But when you have moments like that in a horror movie where you're like, come on, like that takes you out of the movie, and it's gonna, I don't say it ruins the experience, but for that moment in time, you're not in the movie anymore. You're not standing next to the character, feeling their anxiety, feeling their fear. You now realize you're sitting in a movie theater watching a movie, and I think that's bad for horror fans to be out of the movie.
That's why I have a very hard time. So I love Bowfinger because it's a movie about a making of a movie, but they don't even act like they're trying to be realistic making the movie. So I can do that. But I spent years of my life on film sets, just watching the minutia of everything. So there's a movie that came out this year, and it's like 92%. People are lauding it. And I don't want to spoil the twist about it, so I'm not going to say what movie it is. But I was watching them, and like the way they're talking on their walkie-talkies, and the way that they're standing in places and there's C-stands that wouldn't be there, and I hate it. I started yelling, like, that wouldn't be there. Like, if you make a movie about making a movie, make it as unbelievable as possible. Don't try to be realistic with it, because you're not. Also, same with tennis. I played tennis my whole life, and there's no way an actor could look like a pro in 3 months of training. So whenever I watch a tennis movie, I'm like, I can't do it. So I feel you. But also, in terms of being referential, right? I was watching a movie the other day called Vampires in Brooklyn, which I love.
Is that with Eddie Murphy?
No, that's Vampire in Brooklyn. Oh, this is Vampire. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Vampires vs. the Bronx. Yeah, that's it. Vampires vs. the Bronx. Did I say that?
I think you said something with Brooklyn,
and I was like, it's Vampires vs. the Bronx. I mixed up that because I did an episode recently of Rotten Tomatoes where they did Vampire in Brooklyn, so I had to like analyze everything about it.
Gotcha.
But yeah, Vampires in the Bronx versus the Bronx. They make really nice referential comments to other vampire movies. So the company that's moving into the Bronx is Murnau Properties. Murnau is the guy who directed Nosferatu. So there's no suspense wrecked. You just see it and you smile, right? Mm-hmm. And then you see later on there's they talk about Blade, and then there's a Lost Boys gag. But none of it takes you out of the movie because it's not during a really suspenseful time. And I think sometimes when you watch these movies, they'll make like a referential gag to their prior thing, but it's during a really heightened scene. And you're like, oh, and then that zaps you away from it. And I think Dawn of the Dead does a good job with its references with the names of the stores that you see earlier in the film. It doesn't take you out of it, except for those couple moments. It's another one that I dig. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, that was my long way of saying, once again, they did a good job of.
I think that happens with every profession. I think if you're like a contractor and you're watching a movie and somewhere in that movie it has something to do with contracting and you start noticing mistakes, like where you're like, no, that doesn't happen like that. It's going to happen with every profession. And it just happens that when I watch police movies, I'm always like, I'm either like, it doesn't happen that way, or, that's a horrible accident because you got to do a report. I imagine that like if you're a doctor and you're watching a movie and it has a doctor in it and you see him doing things, you're like, oh, come on, we don't do that. That's ridiculous. So I think that happens with every profession that you're going to see in a movie, and you just have to try to look past it to enjoy the movie.
Yeah, I guess the one good thing about zombie films is there's no zombies. So you can't be like, well, I would do that. Like, and then also, you know what I like too about, in a lot of horror movies nowadays, they have to figure out, oh, there's no self-service. There's no this. There's no that. Dawn of the Dead in 2004, there were cell phones, but it didn't matter if you had a cell phone or not, right? So they didn't even have to worry about cell phones. So I think that is, once again, that kind of adds to the timeless feel of it, where it doesn't matter if you have them or not. they're not going to work.